For everyone with an interest in MASH, or more broadly, steatotic liver disease, surf's up. Season 6 of Surfing the MASH Tsunami, our first episode in our new version 2.0 format, about the Emerging Medical Trends Conference from Las Vegas, makes its much belated and much anticipated debut today.
This week on Surfing the MASH Tsunami.
A meeting like this would never happen 3 years ago, 5 years ago. There you would have a meeting where people sitting in one city talking about something called AASLD, and there would be people sitting in a different continent talking ALD. It's incredible that we as researchers and doctors have been so blind. It's in front of us every day in our clinical practice. These are inseparable. Then we got the nomenclature. It was not easy, but it changed the world that we actually now see also as researchers, as clinicians. This is a spectrum.
I always tell my hepatology colleagues, you guys are badasses. You treat post-liver transplant, you do anti-rejection medicines, you've used interferon back in the day to treat hepatitis C. GLP-1s should not intimidate you.
Mike, I'm thinking that now that we have a world full of endohepatologists, Naim has just become the first official Barry endohepatologist.
He is also the father of steatology. Just say it.
This is the update because of the new nomenclature. Right?
Over the last 6 months, I've been prepping for the arrival of the first approved drug by EMA in Germany or Europe, more specifically. So the big excitement is really looking forward. In Europe, we still don't have access to an approved drug, but clearly learning from the expertise of colleagues here in the US and trying to get ready to treat my patients back home.
Our sponsors for Season 6 include
Madrigal Pharmaceuticals, Inc. is a biopharmaceutical company focused on delivering novel therapeutics for metabolic dysfunction-associated steatohepatitis, or MASH, a liver disease with high unmet medical need. Madrigal's medication, Resmetirom, is a once-daily, oral, liver-directed THR beta agonist designed to target key underlying causes of MASH. Resmetirom is the first and only medication approved by the FDA for the treatment of MASH with moderate to advanced fibrosis, consistent with stages F2 to F3. An ongoing Phase 3 outcomes trial is evaluating Resmetirom for the treatment of compensated MASH cirrhosis, consistent with stage F4C. For more information, visit www.madrigalpharma.com.
On April 15th, 2025, Liver Right will open America's first virtual specialty clinic for liver disease, offering adults in all 50 states video appointments and helping GI practices and health systems triage and treat the swelling numbers of patients seeking Masold and MASH testing. Liver Right offers same-week video visits and accepts insurance. For more information, contact www.liverright.com.
Taoism Health, your partner in global liver health innovation.
At Taoism Health, we specialize in providing small or large-scale access to FibroScan examinations for liver health-focused early detection, clinical trials, independent research, and collaborative projects with clinicians and FibroScan providers increasingly throughout the world. As industry-leading experts, we design and deliver high-quality FibroScan services because we know that accurate, high-quality, reliable data drives better outcomes. To learn about our sister lifestyle app, mylife365.me, click the Taoism Health link on the SurfingMASH homepage.
Hey, this is Roger Green, executive producer and co-host of Surfing the MASH Tsunami podcast, and welcome to episode 1 of season 6, the first in our new V2.0 format. Before we dive into the episode, I just want to take a second and explain why we've changed format as we have. When we launched, our goal was in the span of 6 weeks to be able to provide all the information our audience would need to understand what was going on in fatty liver disease as it was then known. Well, a couple of things have changed. First of all, the audience has broadened tremendously. It used to be 60 to 65% industry executives. Now that's about 40%, and most of the difference is made up by actual providers, a little bit payers, mostly providers. Second, So much is going on in this space that we can't possibly cover it in 6 60-minute conversations, one per week for successive weeks. So what we're doing instead is using 3 conversations a week. We'll still do the roundtables that we've done till now, but we're going to cut them into 4 pieces and send them out weekly over a 4-week span. Each week, we will also have a newsmaker interview with someone who's either written a paper, released a product, or done something exciting that week. And then we'll have an expert interview with one of our panel of KOLs who will talk about what progress looks like from where they sit in the metabolic stratosphere, or as Naim Alkhouri calls this in the newsmaker portion, the field of steatology. If you think that this is too long for a single episode, don't worry. We will be releasing the roundtable, expert, and newsmaker sections over the weekend as separate pieces, the same way we used to do with portions of the old weekly roundtable conversations. So here we go. Dive in, have fun. We've had a lot of fun putting this together. We put a lot of work into it. At the end, I'm going to ask you to send me information if you got feedback on how to make it better. You improve us and drive us. So with that, here's episode 1, season 6. Have fun.
First, our roundtable discussion. Louise and Roger are joined by Professor Aleksander Krag from the University of Southern Denmark, who is the current Secretary General of the European Association for the Study of the Liver, Dr. Alexander Lalos from Robert Wood Johnson Hospital, and Jenn Leigh Jones, founder of the Sober Livers Patient Support Group. They discuss February's emerging topics in MET-ALD, MASLD, and ALD conference in Las Vegas.
With that said, let's turn to today's guests and get rolling with the business portion of our session. First of all, we have Louise. Hey, Louise, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much. Nice to be back. Nice to see everybody on the other end of the screen.
Yeah. Since the last 6 months, how many times have you been to Australia?
3.
Yeah.
So it's nice to be in a decent time zone. Normally, this would be tomorrow for me.
Louise will sound alert and awake, and that's because it's not 2 in the morning in Perth. Well, it is 2 in the morning in Perth, but she's not in Perth. And she's awaiting eagerly a football match at 4 o'clock our time that will determine exactly how successful Liverpool will be this year. Alexander Krag, how are you today, sir?
I'm good. Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation to come and join you here.
And thank you for joining. And you say a lot of rain in southern Denmark, huh?
No, we've actually had some pretty nice days here. We see the first flowers coming up. So spring is near, even here in the far north.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And then we have our good friend Jenn Jones back with us again from Sober Livers. Hey, Jenn, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you. Back from Vegas. I've been busy since I've gotten back because I realized when I take a short vacation or a conference, nobody's doing my job. So I came back to lots of emails and lots of work to do for our program.
Okay. Maybe you'll tell us a little bit about Vegas. And then our new guest, first-timer, is Alexander Lalos. Alex is a hepatologist. He's on faculty at Rutgers and treats patients and is an advisor to our new sponsor, Liver Right. So, Alex, why don't you take a minute or two, tell everybody in the podcast world a little bit about yourself and what you do and how you came to be here today.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I have a lot of interest in this field, actually, just being a clinical hepatologist. You know, we kind of went through the whole Hep C thing, and I just feel like the whole world has transitioned now into what this is probably the most significant liver disease. But it's good to join everybody. And Roger, I know you asked me to say something about me, and I guess I'm kind of boring. I don't really know what to say. I will say one thing that probably people don't realize that much. I have a Greek name. I was born in the United States, but I'm really, really very Greek. Most of my cousins were born in Greece. I spent 3 or 4 summers there when I was a kid. I speak fluent Greek. I have an apartment in Athens. I have a couple of close relatives there. So sometimes when people meet me, they kind of get surprised that, you know, they know their name is Greek, but they're kind of surprised how Greek I am. It's part of my identity. I listen to the music, but still an American at heart.
We now have a Greek-American. If you're a resident/citizen of both Australia and England, what is the hyphenated phrase to describe that?
Let's put it this way, 60% of Perth is English. So I think you could call them Australian.
Okay.
POMS, as they're called from the other side. It's why the demographic of fatty liver disease is following everybody around the world.
Louise, what's that city in Australia that's 30% Greek? Melbourne or?
Sydney has a very big Greek community when I was living there, and they burnt down the cinema, the theatre, when you won the Euros, because I lived around the corner. They got a bit exuberant when you won that tournament. So I'd say Sydney's got a very big Greek community, but I think Melbourne does as well. So
with that, why don't we kick off one good thing, personal or professional, or if you want one of each, that's happened in your life in the last week. Brave one, go first.
I'll jump in. As I haven't been here for a while, obviously a lot's happened. We're going from strength to strength with the app that's trying to connect everybody's FibroScans around the world for us, MyLab365.me. We've gone live in 3 new countries, and those countries are Argentina, the Philippines, China, and Hong Kong. So we're now in over 20 countries globally where somebody can record and keep a track of their own FibroScans and for their own lifestyle alterations and things like that. So that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're achieving at the moment. So that's been a good positive this week. It's all in English at the moment, but we hope to change that in the future. So that was a good one for us and our sister company.
Congratulations. Very exciting.
Can I do two things?
Sure.
I just coming out of an EASL meeting, I also serve as EASL Secretary General, and we're just wrapping up the final program for Amsterdam, where we'll have 10,000 people from all over the world, and the program will be amazing. And now we're receiving all the late breakers, and you cannot imagine how much going on in this field. So that is super, super exciting. And then on a personal level, I don't know, we're not supposed to bribe, but this is something that rarely happened. I'm a researcher. But today we got a final acceptance for a paper in the journal Nature. Nature is one of the top journals, so that's something you can do. It's not often you have liver stuff in Nature, so that was a good afternoon this week.
Oh, that's fantastic. Congratulations. We're all quietly or silently applauding. That's excellent. Jen, Alex?
I guess I'll jump in. I guess the most significant thing, Roger, probably was last weekend. Just spending a whole weekend, we're getting inundated now with, your email box, all sorts of material on metabolic liver disease, and you can get information everywhere. It's coming in from all angles. And I think to spend a weekend with experts, as we'll go into, and just focus on it was kind of special. It wasn't you weren't going to another meeting about Hep C or HCC or something. It was really a very focused, and it wasn't super basic science. It was just a real coming together of here's the problem, here's what we know, how do we attack it? So I found it professionally very interesting. From a more personal standpoint, as Roger knows, I've been working at Rutgers, and I'm in the near future, I've been doing a lot of work with doing some consulting work for Liver Right, but I'm looking at some additional possibility things that it's interesting as you get later in your career to have a little bit more flexibility to focus it the way you want it to be. So I guess I'm transitioning into that to a degree, so that's been kind of exciting.
Excellent. Okay, Jen.
All right. Well, thank you, Alexander, for sharing that information. Yeah, the last week before, I guess it was wonderful. When I got back, Sober Livers and Fatty Liver Foundation has recently received a corporate membership sponsor from Boehringer Ingelheim. And the first thing that I'm doing with that money is creating a patient advisory board for them, which is something that they're looking at for a drug that they're creating for ALD. And I was very excited to help fill those roles in different stages of liver disease from our community. And so people are getting recognized that they are experts, finally, in the disease they have, which is alcohol-associated liver disease or a transplant due to alcohol, where our voices before just weren't being heard. And finally, it's getting recognition, and the pharmaceutical companies, as well as AASLD and other organizations like GNC, are really focusing more on ALD. And I greatly appreciate it as somebody who's been tooting my horn for quite a few years now. I'm finally not the only voice out there, which is fantastic, because that's not how I want to be. I don't want to be the sole soldier on the field. So that's been really, really exciting times.
Those of us who knew you before Sober Livers put its head up above the ground and before Hope started are delighted to hear that. That's fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Boy, I'm pretty prosaic compared to that. Okay, this podcast is back with, we believe, enough sponsorship to run for at least a year. If nobody joins the sponsorship list, that doesn't mean we do not want more sponsors. We do. The more sponsors we have, the more we can get done to educate. But we're here. We're back. I'm excited about that. I think I'll just let it be that. On a personal level, I really miss this. So I'm glad I'm back doing it. And that should be enough to start for now. Okay, with that, let's turn away from opening and let's turn more to what's going on. We all, weekend before last, attended the Emerging Medical Trends Conference on Steatotic liver disease of AASLD and EASL. That was in Las Vegas. And it really took a look at a whole range of issues. We're starting with Med-ALD, going to ALD, and then ultimately, I guess, finally going to MASLD from a variety of different perspectives. And I think people poked and prodded in a lot of different ways, provocative questions from the audience, and I think some really eye-opening stuff, which hopefully we'll get at as we go along here. The rest of it is Louise wasn't able to make it at all. She was flying back from Perth to London during the conference. I had to leave a day early for family reasons. Alex arrived a day late, and Alexander and Jen both presented and were there for the whole conference. With that, let me just ask, so Louise, when you took a look at the agenda from the outside in, what grabbed you in terms of interest, or what you thought was interest or most relevant to what you cared about or most special?
For me, I think it was the focus of those three topics and the insights that we got into innovative therapies, the dual agonists, non-invasive therapies, and clinical trials. I think it was a summation of just bringing those areas together and developing or discussing where they were heading in the future. I did hear that Alexander had the task of trying to address the complexities in epidemiology. A brave man, Alexander. Yeah, so it was a shame I missed it, but yeah, on a 17-hour flight, so missed certainly the majority of the conference, but I was able to catch up. The internet and what we can gain in some of the social media allows you to catch up on some of it, but it's nothing like being there in person. So I'm really looking forward now to listening to Jenn and Alexander and their takes.
And there was, by the way, Louise, a professor from Adelaide at the conference. I think that was the only Australian I saw there. Did any of you folks see any other Australians? Okay,
no.
One.
No, they're usually easy to ID, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah, they're walking around asleep. It's a great thing. Yeah.
I made a few from New Zealand in the city, but they were not in the conference.
No. Okay. Alexander, I guess I'll go to you next. So what did you consider the theme of the conference that you thought was most important or most compelling in terms of holding your interest and you think being important for other people to know as well?
I think it was a great meeting, but just to put it into perspective, which I think we don't really realize, a meeting like this would never happened 3 years ago, 5 years ago. There you would have a meeting where people sitting in one city talking about something called NAFLD, and there would be people sitting in a different continent talking ALD. And the only thing they didn't want was in the one city it was forbidden to talk about alcohol, and the other one it was forbidden to talk about non-alcohol. And then the big innovation here, which has changed the whole world. You know, it's incredible that we as researchers and doctors has been so blind. It's in front of us every day in our clinical practice. These are inseparable. Then we got the nomenclature. It was not easy, but it changed the world that we actually now see also as researchers, as clinicians. This is a spectrum. So I think this is probably the most important thing that happened, that we today have a meeting that takes the full span or spectrum of steatotic liver disease from very low or no alcohol to where alcohol is the lead driver. And that was the same we had in EASL a month back in Estoril in Portugal, similar approach that we insist on actually mirroring the challenge in clinical practice. So in my view, this is the most important event that we actually try to understand and talk the same language. And anything trying to exclude or say that this does not exist or whatever is simply naive. And it was beautiful to see that happening and see all these data coming forth, that the reality is more complex. But if we try to understand this, try to understand what is really the driver for the patient, we can make a big difference. So I think for my term, this was really the key when you brought a lot of people in the same room, that now converging, less fighting, trying to understand each other, acknowledging that science and clinics and drug development needs to meet. That's where magic happens, basically.
Excellent points all. So Jenn, what grabbed you the most about the event?
Well, I totally agree with Dr. Krag as far as bringing all these folks together. And not only did we have hepatologists in that meeting, we had endocrinologists, we had a few PCPs, which was amazing. Bringing in different medical providers to listen and learn about what is in the field of hepatology, I think is so important. And I will say also bringing in a patient like myself, who's also the founder of an advocacy organization, was just a really important feature for me, I think. And I hope that you continue to do that with other patients in the future, because their voices needed to be heard. But what I did enjoy as well is bringing it all together, because I'm really one of my biggest, as Wayne Eskridge would say, what really gets my goat sometimes is the way that we have so many silos in this field. And this is really that spectrum that brings it together. This is the reason, one of the main reasons, that Fatty Liver Foundation and Sober Livers have combined together, so we can work together on both the metabolic side, the Met-ALD side, and the ALD side. But what's so compelling is our discussions about what constitutes Met-ALD. I think we got a good discussion started. started, but we didn't get anything conclusive yet. But at least we know that it's an issue that really needs to be looked at and defined correctly if we're going to move forward. Me personally, I don't think it's the number of drinks you are currently drinking, but it really also has to do with your past and what you drank before, because I've been sober for 8 years. And so now I don't know if I have ALD or not. So it was a very interesting views from all the different viewpoints were really wonderful to hear from. So I was very honored to be there amongst all these great, amazing hepatologists that are so pioneering in the field and so dedicated to this patient community. So I just want to say thank you out loud to everybody, all the hepatologists out there that are listening, and for all of y'all that are here, including you, Roger. Thank you for coming, and thank you for inviting me here.
Thank you for joining us. And I will say, we'll come back to this a bit later, but I think Jenn gave one of the most courageous talks I've ever seen at a conference. Just telling her story in very pointed, very human terms, appreciating the idea that most doctors never really get to know their patients on the kind of level that she was describing. And if they did, they probably would understand better what's going on. We quote our dear and departed colleague Stephen a fair amount on this podcast, but I'm going to go to Quentin Anstey, who every time he's been on has in some way, shape, or form said not to let the right be the enemy of the good. And the first afternoon was a discussion about what exactly is Med-ALD and how do you define it. It struck me that we had 6 presentations and 8 definitions, maybe 9. Which means it had vaguely feeling like what people say about the Israeli Knesset, 120 people, 137 opinions. But I think that's really helpful. And if we had waited until everybody had the same validated description of Met-ALD, we never would have gotten there. So now I think we have questions about how do we define it. One of the questions that I heard, I don't know if it got resolved on Saturday or not, but we'll talk about it, is should we be doing clinical trials in Met-ALD, right? I mean, it's a little bit hard to do a clinical trial on something you haven't defined yet, but there are reasons to want to do it, reasons not to. Most of the discussion around what we know in ALD and Mazel was exciting, but if you follow it, not novel. That discussion about how do we define Med-ALD, I think, was a little novel and presages something that we're going to be talking about for a while to come. Alex, I see you nodding. What are you thinking?
Well, I just want to kind of tag on to what Alexander and Jenn were saying. I think it's a big tent. I think that, and you can kind of tell because, you look over, you see an endocrinologist, we never had anything in common with endocrinologists for the most part. I mean, so the more time you spend on this topic, you realize you're going to go elbow to elbow with endocrine, with internists. So it's going to be a big tent. And the big tent is it's not, this spectrum between alcoholic liver disease or alcohol-related liver disease and metabolic-associated steatotic liver disease. So I think we all have to get a little bit more comfortable delving into each other's practice. Along that line, the one thing that I really got out of it, and I was hoping to get out of it, was I think it was Ken Kuzi, the endocrinologist who spoke, I forget which day it was. But he said that as a liver doc, you need to be writing GLP-1s. And I don't think most liver people are. And frankly, I'll admit I hadn't been. But one of my reasons for going is I want to make that a big part of my practice. I think the time has come. So it's all kind of tied in together. Us, doing our endocrine-related work, dealing with metabolic issues, and yet historically being the doctor for alcohol-related liver disease. So that's how I kind of put it together. The other thing I really got out of it, and I'm sure we're going to be talking about it, and this goes back to my experience, and I used to work for a large multi-specialty group in Pennsylvania years ago. This whole idea of who's going to deliver this care and how we're going to do it. And I got a lot out of Ray Kim's talk on that, and I don't want to spend too much time on that. I'm sure we'll get into that. But, how are we really going to, it's one thing to have the game plan. It's another thing to carry it out. The old Mike Tyson thing, everyone's got a game plan until they get punched in the mouth. I think we're maybe a little bit at that stage, but we've got to get to the nuts and bolts. And I think this was an introduction to that.
I like the Tyson quote. I think that's appropriate. Louise, questions, comments about anything anyone said before we step into Thursday afternoon in a little bit more detail?
No, I think I was struck when Alexander was discussing this tie-in and bringing all of these different conferences together. And I think he's right. The beauty of it is to be able to cross that care under a specialty FibroScan clinic in a drug addiction center. And I've seen people further down the line who've improved their alcohol intake. And I'm sure Jenn has clients and people within her group who do that. They improve their alcohol intake and get better from that perspective, but don't change the diet around it. And then we see the metabolic component of poor diet and lifestyle in that context then further impact the disease, because we don't address in healthcare. Sometimes we are siloed. we'll address the addiction or we'll address the diet, but we often don't do it within the same centres. So I'm fighting now, or barracking, to have better dietary input into these clinics and these facilities for patients withdrawing from alcohol so that they get it right from the start. So I think what Alexander was saying about bringing all of these separate conferences now together in the beauty of one room means that we can cross-fertilise our strengths in those areas for the patient good.
So let me ask an irreverent question. So if we're talking about metabolic disease and the links to alcohol use disorder, and a lot of the impacts are cardiovascular, do we need to be talking about smoking at the same time, about tobacco? I ask in part because I have a family member who lives with alcohol use disorder, has not had a drink for several years, but immediately started smoking more when they stopped drinking.
Yeah, that's again the whole thing about what is driving addiction. Of course, we need to see that there's a spectrum also in alcohol consumption. Most just have alcohol overuse, and then there is a part that have alcohol use disorder where they have dependency, and that's probably a brain disease. And that's also what we see the other way around. When you see some people, when you do bariatric surgery and they cannot eat, then they start to drink alcohol. And you probably could see the same if you then fix the alcohol. You might switch to something else, and that could be smoking. But it's very well known that, of course, smoking, we know that for whatever century now, almost that smoking is bad, and also for the liver and for liver disease. So definitely smoking is an issue, but difficult again if you have a use disorder. But that's again important to go straight to the diagnosis. What is actually driving this particular patient? So you not just see it as a smoker or an obese patient, but you actually go one step deeper and actually characterize it as a brain disorder, and then you point it to the correct specialist. Doesn't mean you should ignore the metabolic component, but they might be easier to fix today. Now we just heard the thing about using GLP-1s, and again, very easy, very simple to use, yet still costly. So really trying to get this interview and assess the patients. I think we can come back to that we don't miss the point, because that was an important part of what my point was, that we don't take the opportunity to take a good enough alcohol history, and then we miss out on an important driver of disease in many of the patients.
I totally agree with Alexander there. I do want to say that is very easy to do if you don't get the underlying reason for why somebody's drinking. This also involves a lot of mental health and really evaluating a person's mental health conditions. Some people just need addiction counseling, depending on what their AUD level is. But if they have a mental health condition and we are not looking at especially trauma, right? Because trauma is really something that induces all addictions, and we don't get to the core root of that problem, then it's going to be very difficult. And I told this story many times, but I don't know if I've told this here, but my dangerous drinking happened during severe interpersonal violence. And when I couldn't stop drinking, and I tried many times after I got safe, but in my mind, I'm like, oh, my liver will regenerate, but I really need to work on my PTSD and recovering from this complex post-traumatic stress that I have. And little did I know that when it finally almost killed me in 2018, it finally hit me that the reason I was drinking was because of all these flashbacks and the history and all these types of things. But what was happening is my abusers were still killing me. So they were in my head killing me with every drink that I took. And so that helped me to completely go abstinent. And it really was very, very effective. And so if we can find those trigger points and we can find what it is that makes that person drink or smoke or overeat or overshop or any of the addictions, social media, whatever it may be, if we can find that core root of the problem and then find a small purpose that they can live for, I think you've got a good formula for success. But if you don't, and you just band-aid the problem with like a naltrexone or, a GLP-1 that may reduce the cravings, you're going to still have issues, I believe, with addiction. And people deserve to get relief from their trauma and be able to move on to have successful lives. So that's my thoughts on it. And I'm really happy that we are looking at it from that perspective. A lot of hepatologists are starting to realize the importance of addiction counseling and psychiatric counseling and multidisciplinary care.
So we've kind of stepped past Thursday afternoon into Friday morning, and I'll stay on Friday morning. We'll go back to Thursday afternoon a little bit. Jenn, one of the things I thought was really fantastic about your talk was that even when we know a thing in our head, if we don't know it in our gut or we haven't seen it, we don't appreciate what it really means. So it's one thing to say, I know that patients who come to me with alcohol don't tell me the truth about what's going on in their lives. But you were pretty graphic about what was going on in your life. Raw, more than graphic. Raw about what was going on in your life. And one of the things that led me to appreciate is how much wider the chasm is between what someone might be telling a doctor or anybody really and their real lives. Alex, let me ask you, does something like this, a talk like Jenn's, lead you to think about how to do a better job at getting at that?
Absolutely. And I had the luck that, Jenn and I sat next to each other at dinner the next night. I got more of the sense of, what she was trying to say. And I could go on for 20 minutes on this, but what's happening is, and Roger has heard my talk on preventative hepatology, and it starts with the whole concept that I went into hepatology because I wanted to ban esophageal varices and take care of really sick patients and what's happening to our field is it's really transitioning into something that's more of the demands of a classic physician. And we always blame patients. We say, well, he didn't tell me that, or she was hiding this, or didn't tell me what they were drinking. But, the flip side of it is, are we listening? Are we giving them a chance to say what they're trying to say? And, it's the real world. You're running around. There's someone on the floor with a variceal bleed. Maybe there's a transplant patient. And we're doing a different thing. And yet the next part of this, and maybe where we're going, and more important, is we need to go somewhere and see people face to face. And as Alexander was also saying, talk about all aspects of all parts of the thing, smoking. And we have to just go back to being a little bit of an internist and not the subspecialist. So I like to think we care. I like to think we're smart. I think some of the problem with listening is situational, but some of it is us. So, I think we have to listen better, and we have to, as Alexander said, ask the right questions, find out the details about what's really going on, but it takes time, and it's a challenge.
I was struck when Alex was talking there about a session that was a great session at EASL last year, Aleksander, and it was one of the first patient advocacy sessions that Michael Betel had he hosted it, and there was a conversation between Jose Villamis and James, one of the physicians from Oxford, about what the patient wants to talk about and what the doctor thinks the patient wants to talk about. And it was an amazing session. And in fact, it was so fun and amazing that it set the whole conference off for me and the people we were with. We also covered it on the podcast because it was so good about how we frame and how patients want certain things discussed. And we should ask the patient about their liver and how it affects their health at least once a year. It was my takeaway from Jose. But also, we don't get a lot of time as physicians and nurse practitioners and things to actually have those conversations. So we need to be reading body language. We need to be having those discussions and seeing and making time if there's a discomfort, I think, Jenn, when we look at people's body language and they are wanting more. They are wanting that next question that enables them to open the door to what they want to talk about. And sometimes I agree with Alex, we may not have the time to open that door, but we need to make an opportunity for that person to go there. So I think I was struck by a lot of things and some of the entertainments that we've had in EASL and where those conversations go, because we are now getting in these conferences to some of these really big areas to allow that discussion. That, for me, sounds like that was able to be put out there. And Jenn, you were very brave, and you've been very brave on the podcast in the past about doing that. And I think that gives people such courage to be able to share their stories.
In today's Newsmakers segment, hepatology KOL Dr. Naim Alkhouri of the Arizona Liver Health Institute and patient advocate Mike Betel of the Fatty Liver Alliance join Roger to discuss the recent Desert Liver Conference, sponsored by Arizona Liver Health, that occurred last month in Scottsdale.
For our inaugural episode of version 2.0, we have our first ever Newsmaker series, and we'll have our first ever expert series on this episode as well. For the Newsmaker series, I decided to bring two friends of the podcast, people you know well if you've listened, the ever effervescent Mike Betel. Mike, how are you this morning?
Great. Thank you so much for having me here.
Mike popped on this interview 4 minutes ago, totally bubbly, talking about incretins and what he should have eaten yesterday.
I was waiting for you last night. I don't know where you've been for the last 12 hours, but anyway.
And then from the West Coast, we have Naim Alkhouri, who's gracious enough to wake up at this hour to do this interview. Naim, how are you this morning, besides maybe a little tired?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on, my friend. Always appreciate you.
I appreciate you guys as well. So a lot of the time, this feature is going to be about new published articles. But this week, I wanted to go back and talk about a conference that we wanted to cover but did not, which was the Desert Liver Conference, sponsored by Arizona Liver Health, where Naim is medical director. And Mike attended and participated this year. So, Naim, do me a favor. Why don't you start us off by talking a little bit about the history of the Desert Liver Conference and how it came to be and where it's at right now?
Yeah, so we started the Desert Liver Conference 4 years ago, and it was a small local conference to provide updates on the latest and greatest in hepatology for the referring providers, so gastroenterologists, endocrinologists, and PCPs. And of course, we have a big component that targets also APPs. And then, our dear friend Stephen Harrison was doing his National Liver Congress in San Antonio, and he did it for about 17 years. And then we invited him to come and speak at the Desert Liver Conference. And he liked the location because we do it in Scottsdale, Arizona. He liked the content. He's like, why don't we, merge both conferences? And he was willing to actually move his National Liver Congress to Arizona to join the Desert Liver Conference. So we started doing this, and, he was with us last year at the Desert Liver Conference. Unfortunately, he passed away. But this is really kind of a national now congress where we invite gastroenterologists, endocrinologists, anyone who sees patients with chronic liver diseases from across the nation. We get it sponsored by pharmaceutical companies and diagnostic companies. And this year we had 25 sponsors. We had about 280 attendees. So it's becoming one of the big conferences where people can come and get updates from national, international experts about what's going on in hepatology.
And who better to lead the medical side of that than Naim, who was cited by Ken Kusi on this podcast about 3 years ago as America's first foremost endohepatologist because of his aggressive use of GLP-1s before anybody else.
It is interesting. I think GLP-1s are coming to hepatology, and we anticipate by, potentially September, October of this year. I actually certified in obesity medicine because, I wanted to feel very comfortable prescribing GLP-1s and other anti-obesity medications. I always had an interest in bariatric surgery also and work with that team at the Cleveland Clinic closely. I think you just go where your patients are, like when you reflect back on your day and you say, what did I do today? I mean, it was very clear to me that 70% of my patients have steatotic liver disease, and that the conversations were always around weight loss and GLP-1s and bariatric surgery. And you just want to feel like, you are up to date and you're providing the best care for your patients. So this is where my interest comes from. And I always tell my hepatology colleagues, you guys are badasses. You treat post-liver transplant, you do anti-rejection medicines, you've used interferon back in the day to treat hepatitis C. GLP-1s should not intimidate you.
Mike, I'm thinking that now that we have a world full of endohepatologists, Naim has just become the first official endohepatologist.
He is also the father of steatology. Just say it.
This is the update because of the new nomenclature, right? Because now we have steatotic liver disease, and now we are realizing also that MET-ALD is a big part of what we do, whether we know it or not, because we did that study within the Maestro-NASH trial and discovered that 9.7% of patients that are labeled as MASH actually potentially have MET-ALD. And there's great interest now to design trials and expand that field. So I felt like steatology is the way to go. And basically, it covers endohepatology, but also a little bit of addiction medicine and treating alcohol use disorders. And this is where I'm going next, Roger, because I'm treating these patients and I need to improve my skills.
First of all, that's fantastic. And the idea that you conceived this conference as an integrated site for various people who touch on the borders of steatology. I'll steal that term. I will give you credit whenever I can, Naim. On the borders of steatology means that you're extremely well positioned to move into this new era as we understand more and more that this is metabolic and multifactorial, and it's all the same thing. I mean, I remember 40 years ago when they called it Syndrome X, and they had no clue as to what it was, but they knew it was something. Now I think we know it's real, if you will, really something. The only thing I'm wondering is, you said you go where your patients are. I'm wondering if maybe your patients weren't always there and we just didn't know how to look.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, the nomenclature gave us this new category of MET-ALD, and these are patients that drink a little bit more than what we used to call modest alcohol drinking, but we don't think that the entire liver disease is driven by alcohol because they have the cardiometabolic risk factors like type 2 diabetes and obesity, and they drink between 2 to 5 drinks per day for women and 3 to 6 drinks per day for men. So we believe that the pathogenesis is driven by both the alcohol and the metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance. I think we've known about this. Actually, I've written papers on this, and back in the day we called it BASH, both alcoholic and non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, or baffled instead of NAFLD. So the concept is not new, but I think the quantification and the nomenclature and the consensus among the societies like AASLD, EASL, the Latin American Liver Disease Society, I think this gives us more credibility and hopefully will help us establish a pathway to FDA approval and EMA approval. And many of these medications we use now for MASH have potential to decrease cravings for alcohol, like GLP-1 agonists, but also FGF21s. And then we have data with the Resmetirom, although it doesn't decrease cravings for alcohol that we know of, that it helps in these patients with suspected MET-ALD in terms of MASH resolution, fibrosis regression, and even reduction in MRI-PDFF.
Exciting stuff. So, Mike, as a guy who goes to every conference on the planet you can possibly get to, except maybe a couple in Ulaanbaatar, what do you find? This is a different conference. It started in a different place. It's grown in a different way. What do you find different about this conference?
I was just talking about that with my wife this morning, actually, that what I really, really love, and it's not just because Naim is sitting here, but it's the intimacy, because it's not so huge that everybody's pulled in different directions the whole time. So if you really want to reach out to people, they're all there and available. Even the interactivity during the conference itself, like the presentations, there was time for Q&A. There was the competitive event for the Sonoma race, which was very innovative and fun. And
can you describe that, please? If you weren't in the room meeting, you wouldn't know what that was. Go ahead. Talk about it for a second.
So on the screen, you were watching the team sort of move through the desert, past some cactuses and whatever else they found in the desert. And there was case studies and questions. And it was like they had with using the QR code on your remotes, you would enter your answers, and it was like competing different parts of the room against each other.
That's cute.
It was just fun, a fun way to learn. And you also saw what the people in the audience knew or didn't know. And I think even Naim, you were surprised a few times both ways, but they really knew a lot about what you didn't think they would. And then other times, like, it was pretty balanced and it should have been one way, right?
This was, a CME event, Roger, that was organized by Medscape and sponsored by an unrestricted grant, but they really did a masterful job to engage the audience.
It sounds fantastic. Now, was that new this year?
Yes. I mean, we've always did, kind of product theaters and had them sponsored by pharmaceutical companies, but this was a CME one. And I think this is a new format that Medscape and maybe other CME companies are using. Let me give you some background, Roger, about the entire conference, just so you know a little bit about the agenda. Hopefully others will join us next year. But we started the Desert Liver Conference on Friday morning with a closed-door NIT, non-invasive test think tank. And I invited 8 key opinion leaders, and we reviewed a few what I call landmark papers. So the first section was looking at the NIT data from the Essence phase 3 trial with semaglutide. And the key message is that, in terms of selecting patients, we're going to use the same criteria that we have in the consensus paper and the AASLD guidance update on Resmetirom, because the NIT data with Essence looked very similar to the Maestro NASH. And then we discussed 2 papers, one by the NASH CRN and the second one by Vincent Wong, looking at the prognostic value of transient elastography and some of the FibroScan-driven scores like Agile 3+ and Agile 4 on predicting liver-related outcomes, and the fact that maybe we can utilize progression and regression of transient elastography to predict outcomes. And then in the last part, we discussed MET-ALD and the use of PET testing on a regular basis in patients with elevated liver enzymes, and we also talked about the data with Resmetirom as a treatment potentially for MET-ALD. So that was the first half of the day, and this was closed door. In the second half, we started the NIT Summit. And what we did this year that was different, we allowed all the NIT companies to have 10 minutes on the podium to show their technology, their tests to the audience. And we had someone from the company present. We wanted to give them a chance to share their perspective. So we had basically FibroScan, the hepatoscope company, Escopics, Velicure, Sonic Insights, and Hepatus mind rate, do 10-minute presentations. And then we had SEMA with our liver, and we had Fibrognostics with Liver Fast, talk about serologic tests. And then we had HistoIndex, the company that does AI enhanced interpretation of liver pathology, discuss how you can use their technology to develop NITs using the biopsy as the gold standard. And then we had the CME portion. So we started with another NIT discussion. It was myself, Mazen Nuruddin, and Mina Bansal. And we gave the clinician perspective. We did some cases. Then we had the CME event. And then the second day, Roger, is really all hepatology. So it's not just steatotic liver disease. The first session was about viral hepatitis. We discussed the latest and greatest in hepatitis B treatment. And then we talked about hepatitis C elimination. The second session was the SLD session. And we did a deep dive on Resmetirom, GLP-1s, and future therapies. The third session was on cholestatic liver disease, where we discussed the new PBC medications. We talked about genetic liver diseases. We also discussed drug-induced liver injury. And then the last session was about cirrhosis and its complications, including ascites and hepatocellular carcinoma. And we also talked about pure alcohol-associated hepatitis. So again, the conference is meant to provide an update on all hepatology.
You left out one thing I thought was very innovative as well. You had a whole breakout workshop for the different organizations to demonstrate and for people to try out some of the companies that you just talked about. That was very creative as well.
That's why we have you at the conference, Michael. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. And also, I forgot to mention that, Michael joined us on the stage with the SLD session, and he gave the patient perspective, also the patient advocate perspective, and he shared with us what he does at the Fatty Liver Alliance. This was inspiring for many to hear all the good things that he does for our patients.
Thank you very much.
Naim, that's an awesome setup. Michael, spent a couple of minutes talking about all that. That's great.
Well, you know what? I wanted to read something that made me feel like everything that I do actually matters, and it complemented the conference. So I can read the name because they posted online, but Andrea Borghetto, he posted on Fatty Liver Alliance. He said, a huge thank you to Michelle Jones. And by the way, she did a fantastic job organizing, and the entire team for organizing such a fantastic event. The Desert Liver Conference was an incredible opportunity to connect with leading experts, dive into the latest advancements in hepatology, and explore how we can continue improving patient care through innovation. Beyond the wealth of scientific, medical, and guideline discussions, one standout moment was Michael Betel's powerful reminder of the importance of personalized care. His emphasis on recognizing that every patient is different and that doctors should engage in mindful, patient-centered discussions rather than a one-size-fits-all approach truly resonated. It was inspiring to meet so many passionate professionals and exchange insights on the future of liver disease research and treatment. Events like these enforce the power of collaboration and driving meaningful progress. And then he said, already looking forward to next year. That just summarizes it all right there.
So was that the sum of what you were talking about? The essence of your presentation?
No, it's just setting it up. I passionately shared one of my frustrations, and that is from the patient perspective, the fear and the stress of walking into a doctor's office that's filled with patients, and they walk in, they're already nervous about their maybe even perceived death sentence, which it's not, but they think that the world's ending, and they haven't really spoken to the doctor yet. They go in the office, it's busy, they go in, and then the doctor's like busy sometimes focused on entering the EMR, whatever they have to enter, instead of the patient. So they don't even want to bother the doctor, and that's what they're there for. So my focus was about the importance of giving a little bit of time to the patient who's sitting in front of you and be in the moment and focus on that tailored care approach, and really understanding that patient is not just dealing with a liver disease, but they're probably dealing with type 2 diabetes and hypertension. They're living with obesity, very likely, dyslipidemia, all those other things that we don't even know about yet that may be causing other stresses in their life. And of course, all the medications that they're taking too. Then there's a whole point about behavior, and every patient is different. Some people are depressed. Some people need support and they're not getting it from their families, or they don't have anybody to talk to. There's the whole socioeconomic impacts, like are they in areas that they can't enjoy or have access to a Mediterranean diet, for example. Maybe they can't even get that. Maybe they can't afford that. Maybe their work is so driving their time that they don't have time to exercise and do the 150 minutes or attend to all of the maybe clinical trial opportunities that are available and stuff. And then there's a lot of people that feel very stigmatized by some comments. And I know Naim has said that before, that, a patient walks in and explains their situation, and then the doctor, who's very busy, just says, listen, go home, exercise, eat less, and I'll see you in 6 months. I mean, that's just not appropriate anymore. And you really have to take the time to talk to people. I also mentioned about digital tools and I wear the Apple Watch and the Oura Ring, and I wear a CGM in July. We have that 30-day challenge. And so there's tools available to teach people. Unfortunately, a lot of them aren't covered because you have to have type 2 diabetes to get them, which is a whole other discussion. And then the last thing was just about the support, the need of people to either have their family or professional support, or they can go online. There's a lot of organizations online that can offer group support, and that's really important too. I think that just about covers what I said, but I really mean it. I think that patients are tired of not being treated as people, and so we have to get there.
You know, what I liked, Michael, is that you also summarized what you do, because you do so many things, and I always said, you're a one-man show, but you work like a whole team by yourself. And I think, Roger, it's probably important for your audience to know what Mike does every day, but he does a lot of advocacy work for patients in Canada, but he also collaborates with GLI. And Michael, add to this, but I'm doing a pitch for you here, but people need to know all the...
Yeah, okay. You set me up also on the stage, which I wasn't expecting, and truly appreciated that also.
Yeah, but the second thing that he does that is very important, I think, is he organizes these meetings for patients or events where, patients can come in and they can hear about their liver disease and get a free FibroScan. And I think this has been a big success story with Michael. And I think he's open to collaborating with people, and he has a whole business model that works really well. And it's been a good success story. And then also, he goes to all these conferences, but Roger, I count on Michael, like he's going to take all the good pictures. He's going to summarize the lectures at a high intellectual level that you don't get. Even when I post on Twitter or LinkedIn, I say a few words here and there, just like sharing the big picture, but Michael summarizes the entire lecture in a way that honestly, sometimes I worry that people are not going to come to the meetings anymore because they can just go on LinkedIn and see what Mike said about the meeting. And he posts, some pictures of the slides. I want to encourage sponsors to support him and people like him to go to all the meetings, because we need you guys to be there and help us disseminate the knowledge because of the, social media impact and how accessible it is. I was recently in Singapore, and I had 2 hepatologists from Malaysia come and ask me to take a picture with them. And I'm like, okay, I'm glad you know who I am. They're like, we've been following your work and this is great. We see you on social media. So it just resonated with me that, when you post on social media, you go beyond the audience that you have in the room, and it's a global audience. So thank you, Michael.
Wow. Thank you for sharing all that.
For those who don't know Michael really well, it's virtually impossible to make him blush, but he's getting slightly red right now. Go ahead.
Thanks. Wow. Thank you. I'm at a loss for words a little bit.
Then I'll pick it up. There's something I wanted to say after you were done, although what Naim said was exceptionally helpful. I'm reminded in an episode we did last year, I can't recall who it was. We've done enough episodes by now, I sometimes forget the people. Someone suggested the question you should ask, every doctor should ask every patient once a year is, so what's changed in your health in the last year? What's changed in your life in the last year? And what that has the effect of doing is what you just described, Mike, which is now we're not just talking about your liver. We're talking about the bigger picture. And if something else has changed in the context of your health or your life that might be relevant, it gives the patient a chance to express it in her or his own terms. I don't know if that's helpful to you, but it's one of the things that struck me at the time.
I know, not just Naim, I know that the physicians that were at the conference and the ones that I see, the key opinion leaders, they spend the time because they passionately care. Yes, they're researchers. Yes, they are involved in clinical studies and they do clinical trials and all, but they actually care about the patients and ask the right questions. What I want to focus on a little bit are the first line people, the primary care physicians that are busy seeing patients for so many things, and they are very pressured. I know that there's, financial considerations for them in the time that they have, and it's really important for them to also think about the fact that there are all these comorbidities. So if they're seeing somebody because they're living with obesity or having challenges with type 2 diabetes, they probably have liver disease too, and they should also talk about their steatotic liver disease at the same time. Right, Naim? They're all related, and I don't think they come up. I encourage patients to actually go to their doctors and say, listen, it hasn't really come up in the last few years with you, but I'd like to be assessed to find out if I have fatty liver disease, if they want to say it that way, because I have all these other risk factors, and most likely they've never been screened. AST is not commonly used, at least in this country, unless they think that. I have asked ask lots of people, have you been screened or assessed? And they go, oh yeah, I go every year. And I go, did you have EST? I don't know. I don't think that was. So if they're not having that, they can't even do a FIB4. So where did they go from that?
Point well taken. Let me wrap it up with one quick question to each of you and then one quick question to Naim. Other than what we've discussed so far, was there a particular moment, a presentation, an insight point, a question, something in the meeting that really jumps out at you as having hit the center of the bullseye?
I mean, for me, I always enjoyed the cases and the discussion with the experts. So we did this in almost every session. I think we tried to put everything in perspective. I think our focus today in terms of steatotic liver disease was on the interpretation of non-invasive tests and how to select patients for pharmacologic treatment, make sure that we're not treating too early, but also make sure we don't deny people that have F3 fibrosis treatment because you overdiagnose cirrhosis. We also talked about how to use NITs to monitor treatment. The highlight for me is the interactive cases and just also polling the audience and trying to understand where they're at in terms of their understanding.
Okay, good. Mike?
I think the entire conference, I'll say it was a surprise in a good way because it was run perfectly. There was really no issues or challenges that I saw. And often we're at conferences and things aren't going perfectly. But I think this was very well planned. And the interaction between the audience and the presenters really, for me, highlighted both the importance of having these conferences and the fact that people want to learn more. They're very curious. And even though there's so much access to information now online, people still come to the conferences with a thirst for understanding more about these disease states. And I guess that always in a good way surprises me that there's still that interest level there. And it's growing, actually.
Yeah, I was going to say, it keeps growing over time, doesn't it? Naim, what's to do for DLC 2026? Anything that you know of yet?
Someone gave me the idea that you guys always do it in Scottsdale. Why don't you move to different deserts around the world? So I don't know. Maybe next year we're going to be in Dubai. We'll see. But we have big plans.
Actually, the truth of the matter is you could franchise it and go everywhere. North American desert, Middle Eastern desert.
That's the idea. We'll see.
Fantastic. Hey, thanks so much for your time this morning, guys. And a wonderful kickoff newsmakers for our new format. See you both soon. Bye-bye now.
Thanks, Naim. Thank you, too.
It's good to see you, Mike. Thank you.
Finally, regular co-host Jörn Schattenberg joins Roger for this week's expert interview. The discussion ranges from preparing for the EMA launch of Resmetirom to exciting topics and upcoming conferences to Jörn, building his department in Hamburg.
Okay, so now we're back for our expert interview of week one. First of all, our expert in week one is certainly an expert, but not a surprise expert to anybody, but our colleague and co-host Jörn Schattenberg, who couldn't make it to the roundtable this week. Hey, Jörn, how are you this afternoon?
Good to see you, Roger. I'm great. Sorry I missed the earlier recording. I'm glad to be back on here with you.
I am delighted as well. So Jörn is currently, tell everybody where you are.
I'm not quite sure where I am. I'm somewhere in transit. I'm actually on a short business trip on my way to San Antonio, currently having a quick pit stop at Houston Airport, so I guess in transit.
So what will you be doing in San Antonio?
It's mostly business, trying to catch up with some US-based sponsors and telling them about Europe for a little bit. There's a CLEF meeting, I think, starting tomorrow, and I'll have a short appearance, but this is really pretty much a turnaround trip.
I heard a rumor that you might get to see one of the sites of San Antonio that you've never seen before.
I'd be happy to do, and that was one of my goals. Stop by there and stop by at Summit.
And much to my surprise, Jörn still has never been to Summit Clinical Research.
Physically, I think over the years working with Summit, of course, I feel closely connected, but this is a good opportunity to stop by and say hi.
So, first of all, a note to the audience, which is one of the things you will occasionally hear this year, because we're on a looser time schedule, is what you've got right now, where I am recording this interview on phone, and so is Jörn. Probably more background noise. You should all have sympathy for Mike Wilson. He's going to have to deal with this. We'll have this thing from time to time. So, Jörn, Louise and I had an opportunity on the roundtable to catch everybody up on a little bit of what we've been doing for the last 6 months. So let's take a look at some of the things you've been doing, on 2 or 3 levels, but pick the one that you want first.
Yeah, the look back is not always that exciting, I guess. I would say over the last 6 months, I've been prepping for the arrival of the first approved drug by EMA in Germany or Europe, more specifically. So the big excitement is really looking forward. If you think about the MASH treatment landscape in Europe, we still don't have access to an approved drug, but clearly learning from the expertise, the colleagues here in the US US and trying to get ready to treat my patients back home.
When do you anticipate EMA might approve?
I think we're talking about early fall, really this year.
And what formal steps are being taken that you're aware of or a part of to get the larger community ready for the event?
I mean, the big thing is, as we've discussed over the years in this podcast, Roger, to really identify the right patients, right? We've been setting up a big referral hepatology clinic in Hamburg, Germany now, and it's getting the right people, the ones that you can offer expert care to your clinic and identifying them. I mean, I've been dealing with chronic cholestatic liver disease for a little bit on the side, and obviously there's been new approvals in PBC, which is exciting. So some patients went down that route, but clearly selecting the advanced, getting the diabetes folks to refer the right ones is, still not the easiest task, considering that point of care testing is not ubiquitously available. I think we've been gearing up. We've done a lot of education. So clearly things have improved, but there is more to be done, particularly thinking of Germany.
We get that report from pretty much everywhere in Europe. People have a lot to do to get ready. So there's that. Okay. There's running the department. How is the department going?
Oh, it's fine. It's a small, nice place. Good team, working hard. And for myself, a lot of excitement in trying to be my best and trying to coach people and making the best out of themselves. That's a lot of fun.
What are some publications you've been working on that audience might want to hear about?
There's been a lot of biomarker work that's been done. I think an exciting field is something that I was able to present during EASL as the AI-supported analysis of liver histology in the clinical trials. The MASTER-NASH trial read out, and there is more data to come with regards to AI-supported histological analysis using the histoindex scoring. The question to me still, we're talking about these categories change and the approval of the drug, but there's much more in the tissue. We used to discuss this a lot too. I mean, more finite changes in fiber texture, distribution of inflammation. Of course, been looking at some of the vasculature changes in cirrhotic patients. So I think clearly there's a lot of more information to get from that tissue. On the other side, we're walking away a little bit from liver histology, not in the regulatory trials, but in clinical practice. And there's been a lot of work trying to set up the right tools for the right people. As I said, in referral pathways, but also in our clinics, and reflecting on how much biopsy I used to do. I mean, these days, it's really gone down significantly.
So just to put a number on that, how many, say, a couple of years ago, how many did you do in an average month? Or how many do you do now, would you guess, roughly?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, maybe it's gone down to 2 a week where it used to be 1 every day.
That's a big difference. That's a big difference.
Yeah, maybe it's 1 a week. I mean, the indication for liver biopsy is strong. We're using it to segregate underlying liver disease, establishing differential diagnosis. And I think that's crucial. Clearly, we don't need it to stage any patient with metabolic liver disease anymore. Some papers that really been piled up on my desk for some times are some German reviews on metabolic liver disease, and I've promised some local editors in German medical newspapers an article there, and I'm working hard on that. So actually, I was taking notes and trying to write on that on the way here. So, beyond the multi-center, multinational big papers, there's actually some smaller German ones on my table, and these are sometimes even harder to get by to.
Yeah, exactly. I understand that part. So in terms of drug development, since last time we were podcasting together, the Essence paper dropped from Novo Nordisk about SEMA, and Arun Sanyal presented the late breaker at AASLD, suggesting that the GG allele had impact on speed of MASH development, independent really of anything else, obesity, all the other risk factors. And now we've had this rather exciting set of findings on FGF21s from fructifurmin. I'm wondering what kind of attention or play any of that's getting in Europe right now.
Yeah, I would say, among all the data, the press release on the fructifurmin reversal of cirrhosis is obviously the big bang most recently. And again, waiting for the full data set to be disclosed and published. But really to replicate what we've seen in Hep C and Hep B, that reversal of cirrhosis is possible in this metabolic liver disease. I think a few years back, nobody would have bought into that. And I think the way we've refined the way to interpret histology findings, do biopsies, establish categories, train pathologists in reading the slides and picking up the benefits has made this possible, where I think a few years back we were a little blunt about how to interpret these results, and a lot of colleagues would say cirrhosis and metabolic liver disease will never go away. So that's the big news. With regards to the Essence trial data, very exciting, of course. I mean, the one thing that I can say is that the drug is, of course, approved already in the indication of obesity. So here, the incremental momentum for the field of liver disease is big, huge, but the excitement across all other doctors might not be as strong, arguably because the drug's already in the market. So I think there's a little bit of a different dynamic. On the other hand, expanding that label with a liver label obviously opens the route to discussion, and the things we've been preaching, identifying those patients, treating them consequently. There can be done something with a drug they actually know and have some experience on will clearly help us to manage these patients well. And then putting resmetirom in the mix for Germany, I think this is going to be the big thing. Which patients with underlying liver disease, let's say on a GLP-1 or at a diabetic dose, will need either dose escalation GLP-1 or adding on resmetirom. I think those are the big discussions.
And it's interesting because I've said forever, right? If you have one drug in a class, the question is whether, and two, the question is which. And what you've just described is exactly how that happens. As soon as you have two drugs, people start to think about them differently and bring more patients into the puzzle. And the questions change, which is fantastic. And I think really good for these patients. At the Emerging Trends Conference, one of the things they talked about a little bit, and we joked about on the roundtable portion of this episode, is the idea of endohepatologists and hepatoendocrinologists. Are you starting to see that kind of crossover, and including gastroenterology as well, in Europe? Are gastros and heps starting to write SEMA?
Yeah, I think there are two ways to that, right? So one is training, which is very conservative and defined by state rules and regulations according to boards. We're not going to have that specialty with a certificate anytime soon. The other thing is about practicing and how you run your clinic. And I think in that field, I consider myself a semi-diabetologist these days, treating patients. And clearly this is where you pick up the clinical experience and how to manage those patients. And I do like talking about the cardio-renal metabolic spectrum of disease, trying to squeeze in the liver, but didn't want to make it too complicated and people buy into the cardio-renal metabolism. So I think the liver is depicted well in the metabolism field, and, picking that up, starting to look into some of the indications outside of the liver. That's really, I think, that the type of physician you're describing here.
In the newsmaker portion of this episode, where we had Naim and Mike Betel on talking about the Desert Liver Conference, they were throwing around a term I'd not heard before, which is steatologist.
Well, they're creative. Love it. It's good. Yeah.
It actually captures it maybe a little bit better, because part of the point is we're not just talking about endocrinology and hepatology, but cardiology, as you point out, in the mix, and a whole bunch of other things, right?
Let me reflect about this a little bit. I mean, in HFpEF, they were looking at the pericardiac fat and actually treating that patient with anti-obesity drugs reduces that type of fat. And I'm sure there's clearly a lot less than compared to the visceral or the fat load in the liver. But, it's to the concept that lipid deposition in organs where it shouldn't be. Here, the pericardium, as far as I understand, is detrimental to patients. And by doing all these imaging modalities these days, cardiologists tend to understand that there's room for a steatologist, if you'd like, and it's clearly expanding beyond the liver.
Very exciting. So I know you're the science chair of UEG this year, right? Do I recall that correctly?
That's right. This is actually a commitment I've accepted for some years. I'm going to be designing the program with a strong team first time for 2026. So 2025 still is the program has been pretty much complete. There's currently abstract submission open. So for people that want to reach the broader gastro community in Europe and across the world, I think this is a fine meeting. It's actually going to be Berlin this year. And my responsibilities for the program will start in 2026, but we've already had a first meeting and getting geared up to come up with a good gastro congress. It's very different from EASL, where you go into the deep dive of liver disease and discussing cutoffs and NITs. This is a broader gastro community that you reach, but I like it for being able to educate more gastros on the things that I believe are relevant for them in clinical practice once drugs are approved.
Going back to when you went to EASD a couple of years ago, you've been talking a lot about the importance to be cross-specialty, right? In essence, everything in steatology is a discipline. Everything steatology touches, most of those folks don't know very much about it.
Sure. And I think that's the nice thing, going a little bit outside of your comfort zone there. I mean, gastroenterology is really the field where hepatologists are being trained. I think there are very few places where you actually train to become a hepatologist. That's maybe in transplant hepatology, but clearly training involves gastro. One time it splits up and you have your specialty, but a lot of the folks doing gastro are also serving liver patients. And I have the concern or the worries that if we don't reach them with our tests and just say the specialty, we cannot serve all the patients. So I believe going out there a little bit, broadening it to the broader gastros, that will be an important step.
So what else should we touch on today?
I think I'm still excited about some of the earlier studies and mechanisms we're looking at. this. I think we have made good progress, and we're seeing some of the metabolic master regulators affecting liver disease with the GLP not even being present in the liver. There is room for liver-directed drugs. We've had a lot of episodes with Scott talking about senescence and antifibrotics, fibrolytics. Now that we're able to tune down metabolism, give the liver the ability to generate, how much room is there to actually hit senescent stellate cells, for example, and support fibrolysis? And let's talk about an antifibrotic therapy for some time. And I don't think we've identified all the targets yet, and there is room for more discovery science here, but also drug or compound development, I would say.
Are there targets in development right now that you see that are as far along as phase 1B or phase 2 that you think are particularly exciting?
I've been talking a little bit about uncouplers, which is not a new concept, but I found it interesting that there was a new look at mitochondria, maybe not uncouplers specifically, but some mitochondrial metabolism, oxidative stress in the liver. And then again, genetic compounds have been discussed for some time in patients with predisposition, so targeting the aspects of individualized or personalized therapy. Then again, some new routes of applications, let's say adenoviral transfer could become possible in the future if you have the right targeting liver cells or stellate cells. So I think there's a lot more room for drug discovery here and mechanism discovery. And as we're learning, I think we're just starting to learn how to improve the metabolism to have a liver benefit, but really targeting the liver is something that's not, maybe you can say resmetirom targets the liver through the thyroid hormone receptor specific effects, but I think there's room for more.
FGF21 is an example of a more specific target, perhaps.
True.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to run 180 degrees from that last statement. And one more thing, and then we should let you get to your plane. Anime Deals had a fascinating paper at the Emerging Trends Conference, Emerging Topics Conference. She suggested basically that aging is entirely about senescence, no matter where in the body. And what all senescence, regardless of cell type, has going on is iron overload. So her question was, why aren't we working on iron overload a little more? This was the first afternoon when they were debating exactly how to redefine Met-ALD. And she put up at the end a very clever slide that had a sky clover leaf, 9 different ways to get on a highway on the left, and then on the right, a smooth 4-lane highway. And she said, we're spending all our time in the clover leaf, and we're not looking enough at the highway. I'm wondering, does that align, oppose, or kind of run sideways with the kinds of things that you're talking about as we get more liver specific?
The liver is an important organ in terms of iron metabolism. There's been a lot of research around that. Some of the things we're seeing is the position of iron in the liver. With acute injury and recovery, you see some acute phase proteins around the ferritin, for example, that are even correlates with the outcomes in liver disease. I don't think this is an iron storage disease, but the theme behind it is that iron metabolism in the liver is contributing to inflammation or predisposes, or there are some factors that contribute to that, and I think it can add into the picture. But I wouldn't go so far and call it an iron-centric disease.
Okay, so with that, let me let you catch your flight, letting our listeners know. Jörn, because he was not in the roundtable, will not be on the roundtable portion the next 3 weeks. But I'm hoping for at least one of the expert or newsmaker interviews to get people in who are talking about basic science, and that Jörn can join us for that, which would be great.
We'll be happy to, Roger. And again, we'll catch up during the regular meetings.
Excellent. Hey, great catching up with you. Enjoy your time in San Antonio. Sad everybody at Summit. And we'll be talking next week. Okay. Thanks. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Finally, here's Roger with the Season 6, Episode 1 Business Report.
Slava Ukraini, Heroyam Slava. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. This will be the shortest business report in the history of this podcast. First on Ukraine. While the American government's position has changed, most Americans, I believe, still support the Ukraine position in this unjust invasion from Russia. We're not going to talk about the war week by week, but I will start every episode by commending the Ukrainians for what they do. We're hoping to get at least one Ukrainian newsmaker on in the next month. That would be fantastic if we can do it, number one. Number two, we'll have lots of news in weeks to come about new sponsors, new concepts, where we will be attending conferences, and sharing feedback that we've gotten from you folks about what works and what doesn't. But for this week, this episode's long enough. I think we should just let it go as it is. So from the entire team, thanks for joining our first episode in our new V2.0 format. If you have any comments or areas for improvement, please send them to questions@surfingmash.com, or just send them to my email, which is roger.green@hepdynamics.com, HEPDYNAMICS.com. Next week, we'll be back. Until then, stay safe, surf on, and we're glad to see you again on the podcast. Bye-bye now.
That wraps up Season 6, Episode 1 of Surfing the MASH Tsunami. On behalf of the surfers, our guests, and our sponsors, Madrigal Pharmaceuticals, Liver Right, and Ta Wizen Health, thanks for joining us for the V2.0 kickoff episode of Surfing the MASH Tsunami.
Join us again next week when our Roundtable on the Emerging Topics Conference continues, and our other sections discuss an intriguing new option for diagnosing challenging patients, and how primary care practices are adapting to the increased interest in metabolic liver diseases.